Welcome into Mississippi State Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. Andrew Miller here on a Monday evening, back for another edition of the show. Glad to be here. Glad to be talking about the Bulldogs. Have a lot to talk about tonight. A bunch of football news. Typically this time of year feels like we're kind of trying to. I say a bunch of football news. I had a little bit multiple football topics, and then we had a little bit of recruiting news that I'll be able to get into. But yeah, still plenty to be able to touch on here. On tonight's episode, as I was kind of alluding to, typically right now we're struggling to find stuff to talk about, but no, plenty to talk about with the Bulldogs on today's show. So got a loaded episode, got a lot of stuff we're going to want to get into. Should be a lot of fun breaking all of that down. Obviously, big weekend for Bulldog baseball. Get the sweep over Vandy. I guess we're still waiting on news of McPherson. Hope that's nothing that's going to be too long term. I mean, I think State can sustain it, but going to need the bullpen to come a long way, and definitely going to need. I know they performed well in his absence Friday night, but also going to need to find somebody to emerge as a number 3 pitcher if you're going to lose him. But man, that lineup just so relentless in what they were able to do on Saturday and then on Sunday, getting the run rule. First sweep against Vandy since Tim Corbett had been the coach. It was the first time since like 03, 02. So, yeah, great to get that for baseball. They continue to roll. I love to see that. Still kind of waiting to see if we're going to get any news with MSU basketball in terms of the portal. Haven't had any announced departures just yet. I guess you're not going to have anybody declare their intentions to come to the program, but obviously going to be watching closely to see if anybody chooses to hit the portal over the next few weeks with the program. But so, kind of quiet for men's basketball. We'll probably hit something at a certain point. What are the big things they have to do this offseason, because it's going to be a pivotal offseason for them. Bulldog, Mississippi. First of all, glad to have you here tonight. What's up, Andrew? Any portal news? Levy said he was looking to add another edge rusher, right? No updates since we last talked about it, and I do have a clip on the channel breaking down Cameron Morgan out of Baylor. This is a guy who is the last 4-star prospect left in the portal, like a 90 overall 4-star according to 247 as a transfer. Was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, had some major offers, chose the Bears, and was kind of their prized recruit going into last season. He got limited playing time. Didn't see a huge impact, but I think started to see a little bit more of a role as the season went along. And was a guy that Baylor was sort of expecting to be one of their studs as an edge rusher over the next couple of seasons. Hit the portal, had initially committed to Virginia Tech, and then there was a whole thing about, academic eligibility was sort of an issue with him. Something had to get resolved. He ends up, not being able to sign with Virginia Tech. Whatever was an issue got squared away with Baylor, and he is eligible to move on. Mississippi State and Auburn were sort of the two teams that had come up. Virginia Tech is still going to try to push to get him because they wanted him badly. He had a visit scheduled for State in early May, I believe. I don't remember the exact date on that. Maybe it was April, because that would be quite some time. But was supposed to visit Auburn first and then State like a week later. But yeah, if you could get him, that'd be a very, very talented get. Not a guy that's done anything yet at the college level, but a guy that is still very young and has an incredibly high ceiling as a pass rusher, and a guy that can kind of play a true kind of stand-up edge, hybrid, linebacker, defensive end type role, which of course is one of the spots that we've talked about as being a weakness for this team. So if you can make that happen, that'd be big. And Levy has talked about they're going to continue to pursue and see if there's guys that can add as depth to the roster. I realistically would say Morgan is the only guy out there that if you got him in, you would say he's got a chance to contribute next season. Just because go take a look at the portal and try to go through the top however many players that are out there and go find the guys that are uncommitted. You're talking about guys that just realistically can't play in the SEC. At least not right now. Maybe guys that down the line could. And I don't know, maybe somebody makes me look stupid and I'm wrong there. But you're talking about guys that would be developmental players at this point that you'd be adding to the roster outside of Morgan if you could make that happen. So it'd be a huge get if you could make it happen. But it's just probably, you're going to battle a couple of the programs. And it's no guarantee there. Levy has also said, best available outside of that. At this point, just anybody who could step in that they could help. or just to fill out the numbers. I think it's, 110 is what you get, or is it 105? They still have some spots left available in the roster, so if they can find guys who can step in and contribute, or at least fill a role, provide some sort of depth, I guess would be the bigger thing. They're going to go out and try to do that. I'm sure everybody would love for them to go out and add offensive linemen. I'm here to tell you, you're not finding a lineman at this point who's going to be able to step in and play. The fact that a player like Cameron Morgan is still available at this point is very much an outlier. And like I said, he had a unique circumstance with the eligibility thing, or the academic eligibility thing that's since been squared away. But yeah, look, if you can get Morgan, that's huge. Other than that, I don't know you're talking about bringing anybody in who would be much of a factor the rest of going forward. But we'll see. But yeah, they're still looking to make a few moves in the portal. Just really only one big fish out there that could make an impact. That Coke made a weird noise as I took a sip of that. I hope that didn't come through. But yeah, fun show tonight. Like I said, we're going to talk about spring practice storylines. What are the kind of the biggest questions around Bulldog football at the start of spring practices? Break down the defensive line room. Just kind of talk about edge rusher, which we'll save that position specifically for when we talk about linebackers. But take a look at D-line room to continue our spring positional previews. And actually, off the jump, we're going to talk about State picked up a couple of commitments over the past few days, both for the 2027 class and the 2026 class. Got a late addition to the 2026 class who's going to be enrolling come this summer. So we'll talk about that here in just a second. If you could, leave us a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and have the notifications turned on so you do know when we do go live. And, of course, tell all the Bulldog fans and friends that you have in your life about what we're doing here at Mississippi State Live as we continue to look to grow this channel. And when can you catch Mississippi State Live? You can let them know that, hey, we are live Mondays at 6 p.m. Central Time, unless I push the stream back to 7 p.m. like I did tonight, and Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central Time when we do our call-in show. And if you can't tune in live for those episodes, you can always catch us on your favorite audio platforms in podcast form. I have not checked if we have gotten the Apple Podcast thing resolved. I know it has been that is the higher ups are aware of that and are working on it. But I obviously love to have you guys here on YouTube. But I understand sometimes you want to be able to catch up on the show, can't tune in. It's easier to listen in podcast form, and you can go catch the pod in that manner. All right, first big thing we wanted to get into today, some recruiting news. And I haven't hit recruiting as much as we probably should here on the show, but State's kind of doing some early work getting ready towards next year's class. But they're not done adding pieces to the 2026 class because Mississippi State football picked up a commitment from Riverdale, and that's in Tennessee, cornerback Dre Odie, who is reclassifying as a 2026 recruit. So this is a guy that early in his career had reclassified to go in 2027. I believe was looking for a year of prep school, ends up reclassifying back to 2026. He was able to graduate high school and is going to come to Mississippi State and enroll this summer, choosing State over Kentucky, Virginia Tech, Purdue, West Virginia. Does not currently have a rating on 247, and that's because of the reclassification. Before that, he was, I believe, an 87 overall 3-star when he was a part of the 2027 rankings. But yeah, Riverdale High School out of Murfreesboro, 6'1.5", 6'2", 160. So good length when you talk about a guy that's about 6'2", and at 160, that's not out of the ordinary for a high school corner. Definitely has to put on some weight, and that's one of the things that kind of talked about in his commitment interview. One of the things he said is, and I was talking to coaches and they were like, why waste a year of prep school when you can go ahead and go there and learn the system and build your body up and learn the play. So this is a guy that's not stepping in. You're expecting to be a contributor in year one. He is coming in essentially because he was looking to play college football down the line, obviously, but felt confident in making the decision, felt good about being a Bulldog. Mississippi State was ready to take him on, and he gets to come in and like he talked about, rather than go to prep school, I'm coming to State. I get to be a part of a college weight room. I get to start learning the offense and be developed by Corey Bell and State's DB's staff, Zach Arnett. And kind of get a jump ahead to where maybe by 2027 you're talking about him being ready to come in and contribute, as opposed to, okay, well, I do my year of prep school and then I still need a year to kind of get caught up in college football. He's going to be set, ready to go, ideally. I don't want to put that type of expectation on him. But this is a solid pickup here late, and it kind of fits the build of what State's been looking at corner. They like guys that have more size to them. They like to have that length out wide. And you see, obviously this guy's not 6'4", he's not a Kelly Jones, but you see what having the ranginess of a Kelly Jones out there can do for you, and fits the mold of a lot of the guys State has gone and picked up. And when you look back on his tape from last season, you see why programs were interested. He's kind of sticky in man coverage. And does a really good job of running with guys down the field, as well as staying with them in the quick to intermediate game, even when there's kind of those sharp breaks. Will fly up and make plays when he's dropping out of his zone, so he can still come up and make a tackle or deflect a pass to get it broken up. Not at all afraid to come up and be a tackler, out on the edge when he has to, when you get a running back out there. Not a guy that's going to go and rock you and light you up out there, but a guy that is willing to go and make a tackle. And generally, when he goes and makes contact, tends to get the guys to the ground. So you see a talented player, a guy who has been productive on the field, and a guy that has the frame you're looking for. You put a little bit of mass on him, hopefully, get his speed up a little bit more, and just obviously start to refine his skill set a little bit. And it looks like a guy that down the line would have a chance to contribute. And, look, you don't need him to step in and compete this year. Last year at this time, all the way back into the spring, or all the way back in last winter, we were talking about, what is State doing at corner, and what are they going to have there? Who's going to develop in the room? And we talked about a true freshman at Kyle Johnson as a 4-star. It's like, okay, well, this guy's highly rated. That was a big signing day win. Like, is this guy going to step in and contribute? And that wasn't what Kyle Johnson did. And obviously that was before we knew Kelly Jones was going to be a superstar. But as we saw, State never found corner number 2 opposite of Jones throughout the season, a guy who they could rely on at that spot. This year you feel confident because you've got Kelly Jones. And you look at the options that are there, even though number 2 corner is not settled on yet, and we'll touch on that more later in this episode. You feel pretty good that you got some really talented guys who can step in and play well for you. So good opportunity here for Dre Odie to come in and just develop and be a guy that down the line has a chance to come in and contribute. So a good pickup for the 2026 class, and like to go ahead and get him in with the program. Did get a commitment for 2027 as well, and that's wide receiver Javarius Griffin Jr. Out of Cleveland, Mississippi, Cleveland Central High School. 88 overall 3-star, according to 247, number 18 player within the state of Mississippi. 5'11 and a half, 175. And, chose Mississippi State over Houston, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt. Fits the bill of what we talk about when we talk about a Jeff Lebby wide receiver. Explosive player. They would kind of was the focal point of Cleveland Central's offense. They put him in the Wildcat, and he really tore it up on the ground. Looking at his numbers this past season, he ran the ball 80 times for 609 yards, so 7.6 a carry with 9 touchdowns. Caught 26 passes for 461 yards, 3 scores. This is not a team that was throwing the ball all that much. Last year as a sophomore, or I guess 2 years ago, 33 catches for 522 and 5 touchdowns. But a downfield vertical threat who's got the speed to win one-on-one, a dangerous playmaker in space. That's part of why, that you put the ball in his hands and let him just run the football. Fluid runner who's got some good acceleration, a guy who can make players miss in the open field and also can find a way to weave in tight traffic areas as well. But that big play potential as well, to take a top off the defense, take any sort of a quick screen, quick throw, or like I said, a handoff, a carry at a Wildcat quarterback, turn it into a big-time gain. This is another prototype for what you talk about with a Lebby receiver. And I will say, watching the film on him, I mean, listed at 175, but it's not – he looks like a bulked 175. It doesn't look like a guy that's pretty light. And looks like a guy that would be willing to fight through contact as well. He didn't – going off the huddle film, doesn't look like a guy that was going down all that often on first contact. It could break through some tackles to continue moving ahead. So I think has a good frame on him, good explosiveness. I keep saying it fits the build for what you look for in a Jeff Lebby receiver. I think he talked about that State has continually talked about him as their number one receiver in the upcoming class. And, I'd say that probably makes a good bit of sense. You look at within the state of Mississippi, the top prospects for the upcoming year, believe he is he's number 2 receiver listed in the class behind Deshaun Dillon, just a couple spots below him, but they're basically equal in terms of where they're rated. And then you also have Sheldon Isaac out of Macomb. That's another kid State's been recruiting some that's right there in the same range. All these guys, 88 overall 3-star prospects. Fits the mold of what State wants. And, after the high school class you brought in this year with 5 really talented young receivers who I think are going to be kind of the focal points you build around over the next couple of years. I don't expect them to take a ton of receivers next season. You're probably talking 1 or 2 commits, probably two commitments next season when it's all said and done that you're going to sign. And Javarius Griffin, a guy that definitely feels like a quality pickup. And just closing out thoughts here on the 2027 class, State's off to a solid start to this point. A top 30 class nationally. Caleb Unger right now, the top-rated recruit, interior offensive lineman out of Madison Ridgeland Academy, 89 overall. So, could be a borderline, 4-star type player as an interior offensive line prospect. Griffin comes in as your number 2 prospect. 2 other commitments right now, both DBs, Brandon Allen Jr. out of Atlanta and Hudson Fuqua out of safety out of Murfreesboro, 87 overall 3-star prospects. And I talked about State looking at corner, 6'2", 175, and Brandon Allen. Again, that kind of is the mold that they're looking to. Fuqua, 5'11", 180, so a little bit smaller there at safety. But, some quality pickups here early in the process. The big thing for me in this class, I need to see State dominate line of scrimmage. And it's a big year within the state of Mississippi for players along the line of scrimmage. You look at the top 7 players in the class are all line of scrimmage players. A lot of defensive linemen. I believe 5 of them defensive linemen. One of those guys already committed. Ben Jarvis Shoemaker committed to Ole Miss, defensive lineman out of Choctaw County. But number 1 player in the state, Mitchell Turner out of Louisville. Sam Lejeune out of Poplarville as another 4-star lineman. Derwin Fields out of Brookhaven as a 4-star edge rusher, which I think he did release the top 5 that was State not in it. So you'd like to get in the mix there if at all possible. But you've got some big-time defensive linemen, and State's gotten whipped in defensive line recruiting these last few years. Christian, what's up? Glad to have you here. That was something State dominated for many years, was the top defensive linemen in the state of Mississippi were coming to Mississippi State. Now, we've seen recent seasons those guys start to go out of state, and I guess that's not really new. That's happened for quite some time. But the last few years specifically, Pete Golding and Ole Miss have flipped that to where the 4 or 5-star defensive linemen in the state of Mississippi, a lot of those guys have gone to Ole Miss, which has been really detrimental to Mississippi State. Because you talk about the weaknesses we've had on defensive line, and we're going to talk about the D-line room here in just a bit, and the work you've had to do to correct the issues you've had there. A lot of it's because you've not been able to win these battles in state. And this is a year where you've got opportunities to do that. And it goes for the same way when you start talking about the offensive line as well. Caden Moss out of Jackson Academy as a 4-star. And I haven't seen if these guys have released a top 5 or anything, but LaMarcus Jones out of Callaway, another 4-star lineman. Antonio Berry out of Tupelo as an interior offensive line prospect. Obviously, you got a talented guy committed already in Caleb Unger, but you got to go and be able to win some of these battles for offensive and defensive linemen here within the state of Mississippi, because the trenches are where State is lacking. The trenches right now is the difference between talking about this Mississippi State team as one that can make legitimate noise in the SEC and one where we're having questions, all right, are they going to be able to get to a bowl game? That's what it boils down to, ultimately. So I need to see Levy and his staff be able to do some work and win some of those battles on the high school recruiting trail. That's going to be the big thing to watch with the 2027 class. Do want to take the time to tell you guys about the shop at voiceofcollegefootball.com. Our incredible merch store. Awesome gear. A lot of teams represented. Mississippi State not on the list just yet, but I'm sure plenty of you know fans of these other programs in your life. If you're looking to get them some gear, you can go for the team-specific shops. But we got hats, T-shirts. That's the one that's got that maroon color for you. Polos, sweatshirts, mugs, coolers, tumblers. A lot of great gear at the Voice of College Football shop. Definitely go check it out and rep the Voice of College Football brand. Why it does the camera thing, I will never know. It annoys me every single time when I switch that. That's not right. We'll get it one of these days. There we go. All right, camera back fixed. Every time I go to share my screen, it automatically defaults to the full screen, and nobody wants to see that. We have to be able to get the background back, and it takes me forever to get that figured out every single time. Next up, wanted to talk about spring storylines for Mississippi State football. It's a pivotal spring for Jeff Lebby and Mississippi State. Year 3 for Lebby leading the program. You obviously took a big step forward last season, being able to go from 2 wins to 5 wins, getting a couple power conference victories, winning a conference game for the first time since 2023. Did play in a bowl game, albeit in a different manner, but still got to the postseason when it was all said and done. And you saw the talent level increase on the roster. Now, as we've talked about ad nauseum, was there a lot of things to look at and be concerned with? Certainly. But you did see the program take a step forward, but now you go into year 3, and this kind of becomes a big pivotal year of this has to be a season where the team takes another step forward. And you need to start seeing the results on the field pan out and see a product on the field that fans can be excited for. And it starts with what you're doing this spring. It started back in the portal and the moves you made then, which we've discussed plenty, and our thoughts on the portal class. Now you start to see it on the field, and some of those guys who have come in, who's going to take over bigger roles, what returning starters are going to take a step forward into being high-level players. A lot of big questions for this team in the spring. Obviously, spring practice got underway this past week. So I guess now with week 2 of spring practice underway, biggest storylines facing Mississippi State football, and we'll run through these. Number 1, do you get a clear-cut left tackle to emerge? I feel like that is the question for this team over anything else, is who do you get at left tackle? You went into the offseason understanding that was a question that had to get addressed. Whether or not you addressed it in the portal is debatable. It was made even more questionable by once you lose at left tackle. I cannot believe I'm blanking on his name right now. State starter at left tackle this past season. Oh my goodness. This is incredible that I'm forgetting his name in this moment. This is wonderful stuff. There we go. This is incredible YouTube on my part. We're basically gonna run through this again. I've done. How did Javen James? Why did I forget the name of Javen James? And for as much as I've talked about Javen James, to have that blank in this moment is truly impressive. It's truly impressive on my part that I'm as scattered-brained that this player that we've talked about ad nauseum, I don't forget. So the number 1 spring storyline for Mississippi State by far is who emerges as your starter left tackle. Because like I said, as you go throughout the offseason, you knew this was a big move thing you had to address. You thought you addressed it to an extent with the addition of Brandon Snee, but then you find out that he's not going to play for you this year. And you look and you don't have anybody stepping in that has proven themselves as a high-level left tackle to this point in their careers. And, you lose Javen James, who you can have whatever opinion about him you want. The guy probably was a replacement-level starter, but his replacement-level starter better than what you have at the moment? That's the question that has to be answered. And you're hoping as you go throughout the spring that you get a clear-cut answer to that. And what are their options? Right now, I think the leader for that would be Miles McVay coming over from North Carolina, just because that's a guy who's done it. Was not a starter at UNC, but got playing time both at left and right tackle for the Tar Heels past season, and showed some things to feel good about and feel like he could continue to develop and become a starting lineman moving forward. But again, hasn't been in that starting role. So he's probably your leader at the moment, but is he ready to take over that full-time job? You look at a Saquon Miles, who last year was the top-rated JUCO offensive tackle in the country. You bring him in, takes a redshirt year. Not the same caliber of JUCO lineman that maybe we've seen State take in the past when JUCO recruiting was a bigger thing. We're not talking about a guy who's to the level necessarily of a Martinez Rankin, but a guy that, hey, State had to fight off, like Ole Miss up till signing day, really wanted Saquon Miles. So clearly a guy that's got ability, other SEC programs very much interested in the game for him. After a redshirt year, is he ready to step in and compete for that job? Another JUCO guy, Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins, kind of the same thing, who steps in. You think he's got the potential, but takes a redshirt year. Do you go younger? Is Tyler Miller coming out of LSU, who last year redshirted for the Tigers, battled some injuries, didn't play, but big frame on him and a high talent ceiling player? Is he ready, even not getting to develop maybe the way you would have liked to as a true freshman because he was injured? Can he step in and be that guy right away? Isaiah Dent, Oklahoma, who's kind of that prototypical frame for a left tackle. You've got a lot of options, but you don't have the guys who have proven it just yet. So that is a wide open battle as we go throughout the spring. And look, to me, that's ultimately where I'm settled, is that determines State's offensive line. I think I have, and maybe I'm convincing myself, and I'm this is optimism. I've talked about when we did the O-line room breakdown that I think the interior O-line could be okay when you talk about Cannon Boone, DJ Chester, and then an LJ Perdome. Maybe you kick Blake Steen inside. I think you've got solid options there. And you've got some guys that have played well in those spots. Right tackle, I think you'll get that figured out. If you play Blake Steen, you're probably fine. If you play one of the aforementioned guys, you're probably fine. You've got to have a left tackle. You got to have a guy that can protect Camario's blind side. It's that over anything else. So who can step in and win that job? If they get left tackle figured out, I think they will be okay, at least okay enough on the offensive line for this offense to take a step forward and be good on that side of the ball in 2026. But they got to get that part figured out. Then you go to the exact opposite side and opposite of your left tackle, and you talk about, well, number two, who brings the juice at edge rusher? Pass rush has been such a big issue for State in recent years that they've not been able to get those guys that can consistently get after the quarterback. Last season, Nick Mitchell as a linebacker led you with 2.5 sacks as an inside linebacker. Will Whitson was tied for the team lead amongst defensive linemen with 2 sacks. And obviously he played 1.5 games. You had Calvin Dinkins, Malik Silla, DJ Reed. But in terms of those guys coming off the edge, Malik Silla with 2 sacks. I know he had like 7.5 tackles for loss, had a lot of quarterback hurries, but didn't get that type of production you would have liked to have seen. Didn't get that either of the past couple of seasons, really, when you talk about guys as sort of in that edge rusher role. And we can talk about defensive end versus, stand up, that Sam linebacker spot. It can go both ways, but that Sam is kind of the guy that's sort of driving this the most, and State's just not gotten the production, or, Jack linebacker in the previous defense. Do you have a guy to do that? And the guy that I'm getting excited about is Micah Nickerson as a true freshman. And I hope I'm not putting the cart before the horse here, but that was such a big recruiting win for State to get this guy who's such a late riser, hidden gem prospect, get him flipped back after he had flipped to Missouri. A guy who ends up, rivals had him as a top 50 player in the country when it was all said and done, who is just an explosive pass rusher off the edge. And all the question is, can he get his body right? He's up to 250 right now after, just spending the winter in Starkville. if he can continue to develop, he can be ready. That's a guy who's got a chance to make an impact. And I'm glad that he got to go through bowl prep. I'm glad he's going through spring. That helps a lot because he probably has the highest talent ceiling of anybody there. Then you talk about the guy who's brought in to play that role, the guy who's going to be named the starter, I would imagine, at Sam linebacker, Amari Williams from Florida State, who very athletic player, splitting time between tight end and defensive end for the Seminoles, and kind of showed a few flashes at both spots, probably flashed more as a pass rusher, which is why that's what, now that he's hit the portal, he's focusing on. And a guy, look, Florida State fans weren't happy to see him go because they felt like, man, if we'd locked him in, we think this guy could have been something, but hasn't done it yet. Now, clearly the fact that Zach Arnett was so comfortable bringing him along after coaching him at FSU, and the fact State didn't go after some of the guys that we talked about they should have, like a Harvey Dyson or a Caleb Herring, that they didn't really push hard to get those guys and try to spend up for those guys, that probably speaks highly of Amari Williams and his potential. But we got to see it. Is he going to show that this spring that that's a guy? Is Tyshawn Willis, after a redshirt year, ready to kind of play that type of role? Do you move any of the linebackers, like a Ty Lockhart, like a Darian Gillette? Do any of those guys move to that Sam linebacker spot? They need to find somebody because, look, that's the fact that you just cannot get pressure on quarterbacks is tough. Now, look, Will Whitson being back, even though he's going to be playing a different spot as more of a true defensive lineman, that does help because that's a guy who, what we saw, that's a guy that gets pressure. And if Whitson is getting pressure on one side, that opens up for everybody else on the line to be able to go and make an impact as well. But that Sam linebacker spot, that edge rush spot, they need a guy who can consistently get some pressure. And again, maybe you look more to defensive end, like with a guy like a Gus Cordova, and maybe that's more where it comes from. But you really need somebody to emerge at your edge rush spot. Number 3 question, we got to always talk about Camario as much as we can because why wouldn't we? Where is he at in his development process? And obviously, goes through all of last season, was there throughout the spring. We got to see him in the spring game, and he put on a show. We see the flashes throughout the season. You see the ability, the raw talent. He gets to make a couple starts late in the year, and very clearly, hey, this is the guy. How has he progressed throughout the spring and throughout the offseason? Obviously, he had to go through the rehab process. So, you had a stretch there where, because of the bowl game injury, was not getting to really work on anything other than just getting healthy. But he's full go for spring. And this is one of those things we're not going to fully know until spring practices come to an end. But, how far along has he come in terms of his comfort within the offense, his comfort with the receivers that he's going to be throwing to? The passing game's the big thing you're going to be looking to with him, where that short to intermediate pass game, where is he at? And is the accuracy refined a little bit more now that he's more comfortable in the system and you're not just throwing him out there blind in the way that you had to at times last season? That's going to be the big thing to watch with Camario. If he looks like a more complete passer after just the one-off season, that gives you all the more confidence in what this group can look like. Sven coming in with the Hail State. Hail State, haven't seen you in a while, Sven. Glad to have you here. But yeah, just his development. We know what he is as an athlete. We know the arm talent is incredible for him to launch it downfield, and we can run this offense with what he has right now. But if you can see him start to take those next steps, that's going to be really big for this team. Then number 4, kind of the questions of who's going to be catching the football from him, and that's who's the next Brennan Thompson on this team. And not to suggest that Brennan Thompson can be replaced, because a guy that runs a 4.26, they don't just grow on trees. Brennan Thompson was a special athlete, and that's why he put together the best receiving season in school history from a receiving yardage standpoint, and should have shattered the record by even more if not for some of the misses when he was wide open downfield. But obviously somebody's got to play that role as the field stretcher in this team. Anthony Evans, obviously that's your guy that you can send him deep. He is able to win one-on-one, and you'll take those shots to him. But primarily, he is working that short to intermediate part of the field. He's your possession receiver is not the right word, but he's kind of the go-to guy. We just want to get the ball in the hand of this guy because, 1, we trust he's going to be able to get open. And 2, we trust he's going to get the conversion and move the chains for us, and also can make those plays after the catch. But you need that guy who's going to be the field stretcher. We need that guy who is going to be able to you're going to take those shots, dude, because you're going to take shots every single game in this offense. I think the leader in the clubhouse is Marquise Johnson. coming over from Missouri, who that was kind of supposed to be his role for the Tigers over the last few seasons, and you didn't really fully get to see that materialize because of just the surrounding pieces. Maybe you look at a San Francisco McGee, who's sort of just been this highlight reel machine in spring practices, and you got the one taste of it in the bowl game. Does he take that another step forward? Is there someone else that we're not really talking about yet? Is Aiden Williams finally going to be, as a final year college football, does he break through as that type of a player? If you find that guy, though, with what you have in Anthony Evans, and again, I think it's a deep room. Maybe we're talking about a freshman, right? It could be an opportunity as well. But do you have that guy that is a consistent field stretcher? That's what you got to be able to find. Sven letting us know we need is 2 good lines before we think about wide receivers. Sven, you got in late. We talked about the line. We talked about the questions at left tackle. We talked about questions at edge rusher before we talked about receivers. So we did think about those things before we talked about wide receivers, for what it's worth. Those were questions 1 and 2 for the spring. And I don't see any way this O-line can protect Mario. Look, again, it's a big question. If they get left tackle figured out, though, I feel okay. I don't think it's going to be a great group, but if they get left tackle figured out, I can see it. But it's number one question for sure. You got to get that figured out more than anything else, and then find an edge rusher. But we did talk about those things. Last big question for the spring, number 5, and I alluded to this earlier. Who is cornerback 2? We know what you got in Kelly Jones. You got a future first-round pick. You got one of the best cornerbacks in the country who's going to lock down one side of the field. Opposite of him is the question. You got a lot of good options because last year you lacked the options, but when it was all said and done, it came back to bite you. This year, you bring over a Quentin Taylor who made 5 starts or 6 starts for Iowa State this past season and performed well, and looks like a guy that, as he continues to grow, continues to develop, going to be a quality starter at least the power conference level. Can he make it happen in the SEC now? Caleb Singleton from Syracuse is a high talent ceiling type player. Jamrock Grimsley still hasn't fully put it together yet, but obviously battled injuries early in his career. The profile coming out of high school, very, very high. So now if he's fully healthy, what does that look like for him? Is Jet Jefferson the guy? We remember going into last season, the talk of camp, at least when he came to the secondary, was that Jet Jefferson was impressing, and that he, as a JUCO transfer, looked like he was going to be the guy to step in and, probably be cornerback 2, opposite of Kelly Jones. Is that the case this year? Now that he's back fully healthy and has a year under his belt, can it be Jet Jefferson? Can it be Kyle Johnson, based on a high talent profile coming out of high school after a redshirt freshman season? You've got a really talented room. And I think you feel pretty good. My favorite for this would be Quentin Taylor, just because he was a starter. Right. We've seen him be a starter at the power conference level and perform well. And if that's your cornerback 2, I think you're probably in a good spot. But I'm going to be curious about that battle. Can you find the next guy to really emerge opposite of Kelly Jones? And if you get that, you get a guy who can just be a quality starter, doesn't have to be shut down. This secondary is going to be really strong. It's going to be a strong secondary. And that would help out everything else you have on the defense. So, again, those are the 5 biggest questions I have for State as we talk about the spring, the big storylines for spring practices, things we're going to be keeping tabs on over the next few weeks. And hopefully, once we get through the spring game, assuming there is a spring game, I know that's kind of a whole debate right now, we'll have a more clear answer to where things look going forward. All right. Sven, I'm done with the dumb stuff Levy does. He had the money to offer Seton. There was enough proven offensive linemen in the portal for under $1 million. They offered Seton 5 and got nobody. Levy has done 5 and 7. Under $1 million, I don't agree about that. I think now, like the number going around for a guy like Lance Hurd. I was blanking on his name. Lance Hurd from Tennessee was like $3 million was the number. And, that was a deal. We've talked about Lance Hurd some. Tennessee did not feel he was worth $3 million a year. They felt he was just an average starting lineman. And average sometimes feels like a knock. I guess they felt like he was a solid starter at left tackle. They felt he would be better at right tackle. He did not want to play right tackle. He also wanted to make $3 million. So Tennessee said, goodbye, have fun. Kentucky desperately needed him and was willing to pay $3 million and let him come play left tackle. Mississippi State's in the same boat as Kentucky. I'm not sitting here saying they shouldn't have done that. You definitely could have gone out and paid the money to make it happen. Jacarius Peak from NC State, who ends up at South Carolina, who I guess hurt himself in like a basketball game with the football team. Wouldn't be happening if he was in Starkville. It probably would, given our luck. But that's a guy who is a high-quality starter. Probably going to be worth a lot of money. $2 to $3 million would be the guess. I don't know. I haven't heard. We've heard the number on. For Peak, I haven't heard what he ultimately got paid to go to South Carolina. But yeah, you would have had to have paid up, but you would have gotten a guy that you feel confident could step in. I don't necessarily disagree. We've talked about the seeding thing a lot. While I appreciate the willingness to go all in and show, hey, we can spend for a big-time player and we're going to swing, knowing how big of a long shot it was, knowing the needs that you had, could you have diverted those funds elsewhere for guys that you are confident you can land and go win those battles to bring them in? That would perhaps have been a smarter use of resources there. We'll see, though. It's a big question. Or, opposite line, because I know you talked about the defense as well. Would you have gotten a guy that could have stepped in and been a big-time player on the defense? That's another question. Belong Mississippi's fan. I think every state fan is asked about the line of scrimmage. Just came on Andrew's show. Yeah, no, we talk about it every single week. We're going to talk about it every single week or twice a week, whatever, until we get through the end of the season. It's going to be the question for this team. No doubt about it. Believe me, I'm not sitting here trying to sell you that it's going to be great. I know I say that. We did a positivity show on Thursday. I talked about reasons to be optimistic in this team. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel that the offensive line could develop into something. But they've got to get left tackle to hit, and they need a couple young guys to be ready to play and play well. And we just don't know that they're there yet. We don't know. Defensively, it's I think you got a lot of guys who are SEC level players. Do you have the guys that are difference makers? You're hoping Will Whitson is a difference maker. You're hoping Dalen Evans could be a difference maker. And I say hoping Whitson because for as awesome as he looked, it was 1.5 games against Southern Miss and then Arizona State, who was good, not great. Haven't seen him against an SEC offensive line. What does that look like? You're hoping one of those transfers at edge rusher could be a difference maker. If that happens, and Sven did say, defense will at least be okay under Arnett. Yeah, I think the defense, I'm actually weirdly optimistic on that side of the ball. Not weirdly. I'm cautiously optimistic the defense takes a really nice step forward. Bulldog Mississippi. Did Javen James leave because he thought Seaton was coming, or did he just go to Bama for a bag or what? A little bit of both. James was very much not happy with that whole situation. I know he wasn't happy with fans. And look, I can't blame the guy for being PO'd that his name is being dragged through the mud constantly. Now, I'm not blaming fans for doing that because at the end of the day, people are allowed to have their opinions. And I know people still have mixed feelings on, when it comes to talking trash about college players. And I do think if you're going in the mentions yelling at a guy, I don't get adding them. I don't get saying. But if you want to say, dude, this guy can't play, you have every right to do it. And, hey, they are getting paid now. So, you're going to get criticized if you don't perform, and he wasn't performing to the level he needed to be. As I've talked about, I do think it was probably a case of his low moments really just – the low moments were not as common as we think they were in real time, but they were so low that it felt like they were – that most of the time he was fine out there. But when it got bad, it got really bad. And with linemen, we only notice when it's bad, so it felt like it was a lot worse than it was. I say all this, he was voicing his displeasure. He posted a highlight reel from the season at one point, basically saying, hey, I see what y'all are saying about me. And then it became known once State was heavily pursuing Jordan Seaton. That's when, our insiders started saying, hey, Javen James is pretty upset, and he's demanding X number of dollars in order to stay. State wasn't going to pay it because they felt like we can't look at you as a guy that we are confident can be a starter. They didn't even give him the starting job. He's going to be left tackle number 2. Oh, you're talking about at Bama. I'll get to that in a sec. State was not going to pay him what he was asking because State was we're not guaranteeing that you are a starter here. Clearly, the fact that we're trying to recruit over you. I think State's perfect world was Javen James stays on as a swing tackle. as we find a guy to come and play, or maybe he becomes your full-time right tackle, takes a step and develops a little bit, and you're better off there. But with the way things went down, he was kind of like, you're going to have to pay me to keep me. And State wasn't going to do it. Alabama was willing to pay him. I don't know what they paid him. I know Bama went after a lot of linemen this year, and it kind of seems in the same way that guys like Zach Owens was able to go and land at Missouri. And I know Luke Works showed some flashes as a freshman. He wasn't great this past season. And the same thing with him going to Missouri. And I don't know if those guys are going to start. The value of bringing in a guy that's been a starter in the SEC is just really high when it comes to offensive line. Because this is the whole thing we talked about with Jordan Seaton. There's simply a lack of high-level players in the portal at offensive line, which is why the price tag on Seaton was so high. But it's also why the price tag on guys that are just okay starters, like a Lance Hurd, is $3 million plus. A guy who is a replacement level starter within the SEC can probably ask for, I don't remember the rumored number on James, so I'm not going to say it. I don't know if it was over $1 million. I don't think it was. But there's guys who are probably making over $1 million that are replacement level offensive linemen. And it's because, you know what, we'll take a guy that we've seen has at least played before and hope that he gets a little bit better versus these guys who have no experience, which are kind of your other options when you talk about portal linemen. Now, for it's going to be left tackle too. They have a young left tackle they feel really high on, who was like a 4 or 5-star signee this past season, who's probably going to be the lead guy there. They also have a guy who's at right tackle who can compete. I don't think he's going to truly, and you asked why go to Bama to ride the bench, he's a senior. He's not a senior. He has a couple years left. This past year was his redshirt sophomore year. Probably Clint Lamb, who covers Bama for Cover Crimson, who's done a good job also talking Mississippi State as well. I watched his breakdown on it. He thinks James is probably the swing tackle, which kind of talked about what I think you would have, perfect world, what you would have talked about for State. He's the guy that if either a left or right tackle goes down, that's who they would turn to. But a guy who could spell minutes at either spot because he's done both in his career and has at least shown some ability to do both to this point in his career. But he's going to compete for a job there. I mean, look, if he wins a starting job, I'm not going to be entirely floored because at the end of the day, big frame and he was like 6'5", 6'6", 320, and a physical player. Like he had some rough games, but he was also, like I said, a redshirt sophomore. If he takes a step forward, I mean, that was the other thing. Part of why you would have perfectly wanted him at State is what if he does take a step forward? We haven't seen him be able to do that quite just yet. But if he does take a step forward, well, he could have been a guy that could have helped you. And that's where everything else you've talked about with the offensive line has kind of been a question mark. But, I've said it time and time again, State was well within their rights to try to upgrade over Javen James. And they are correct to have not paid what he was looking for just because he got upset. But when you lose as many guys as you did that played a lot of football as you did up front, and then you don't bring in guys who have played all that much to replace them, you're taking a big risk. You're taking a big risk. No doubt about it. Sven here, for me personally, I enjoy baseball right now. I'll not spend time to think about football until July. At least in baseball, we have a serious shot. Baseball team's awesome, and I don't blame you one bit. They're certainly a lot more fun to watch than anything else that State has had from an athletic standpoint this year. You have a legit national contender in baseball. I don't blame you. I don't blame you. But, we're talking a little football right now. Last thing we'll get into, going to do another positional preview for the spring. And we're going to talk about the defensive line room. And, this is a group that last season State had to kind of reshape completely through the portal. They had to bring in a lot of bodies simply to get more depth in that room because they didn't have that depth the year before. It was a lack of talent, a lack of depth 2 seasons ago, and a lot of guys that just were not able to play in the SEC. So you went out and added a lot of bodies that you thought could help you, and they did get better along the defensive line last season. And I thought they brought in guys that showed you enough to think, okay, either that guy is going to be a quality rotational player for you moving forward, assuming you find somebody to step in ahead of him, or if he takes a step forward, could be a really solid player for you. Now, you didn't have those guys that stepped in and were big-time impact players. The one guy you thought was going to be that, and Will Whitson, obviously gets injured 1.5 games in, done for the year. And it's like, well, what are we talking about with this group if Whitson had stayed healthy last season? Which, to be fair, if Whitson stays healthy last season, you don't get him for this year. But, would that D-line have looked stronger with a guy like him out there? I think it would have. It's just a question of, in SEC play, what would the impact have been? But I thought the guys that you had, who mostly stayed healthy throughout the year, showed you enough to think, okay, I think the guy's at least solid, and if he takes a step forward, could be really good. They didn't get pushed around every single week. Now, against teams with competent offensive lines, strong run games, yeah, they largely got pushed around. They didn't generate a pass rush. That was another big issue. Now, I thought when you talk about getting pushed around some, though, interior defensive line, I thought at times was okay last year in terms of teams that just wanted to line up and just run inside zone at them, just straight handoff up the middle, didn't necessarily have a ton of success. They generally did a pretty good job of plugging the gaps and making plays and limiting those attempts. The teams that were really able to go out and set the edge against them, more outside zone, pin and pull type schemes, those teams put them in a world of hurt. And that's where you saw, what Arkansas was able to do running the football on them, what Florida was able to do at times, Georgia, Missouri. Those teams really hurt them in that way because you just didn't have those guys on the edge that were strong enough. And you're hoping you've got that fixed this year. So taking a look at the room for 2026, and we're not going to talk about Sam linebacker. So that stand-up edge rusher, save that for the linebacker room, even though it's kind of a hybrid position, going to be pass rushing on a lot of downs. We'll save that for the linebacker room, especially because I think there's a few guys at inside linebacker who could factor in at that spot. So we're just going to be talking true defensive line, defensive end, defensive tackle, nose tackle as the guys we're hitting. And we talk about the players that are coming back this year, and we're not going to hit every single player, but the guys who are the top returnees, Will Whitson is the first name that obviously is going to stand out to people. Getting him back for a 6th year of college, who in 1.5 games was as impressive as any defensive lineman State's had in many, many years in 1.5 games. 8 tackles, 4.5 for a loss, 2 sacks. I believe there was a forced fumble in there. Was just a very disruptive, explosive player for State. Playing kind of as a 4-eye and also a little bit of a 5 technique at defensive end. Not a true edge rush guy, but they could put him there. And I think he's explosive enough. Even at 295 pounds, you could put him out of the edge if you wanted to. Getting him back is huge for this team. Now, as I've alluded to a few times, what is he in SEC play? That's the question with Whitson. We saw it against Southern Miss on like 25 snaps. We saw it the first half against Arizona State, which was a good, not great team with a solid offensive line. Going up against SEC teams, what are you going to get from Whitson moving forward? Now, to be fair to Whitson, every time he's played in college football that he's been healthy, he's been that disruptor. Very disruptive at Coastal Carolina when healthy. That was kind of the key with him as he battled injuries at Coastal Carolina as well. And then, of course, the small sample size of Mississippi State. The sample size has not shown those big-time programs. What does he look like against a strong offensive line? That's the big question. But the flashes we've seen from him, to be fair, greater than what we've seen from anybody else that State's out of the roster. So the ceiling is there. I'll be interested to see how Arnett chooses to deploy him. I think it would make most sense to play him as a defensive end. Even though he's got the size to be an interior guy, I think you can kind of play him. I think they'll move him around. I think you'll see him line up some as like maybe sometimes as a 3 tech, but probably more 4-eye out to a 5 tech. Maybe sometimes getting out to like a 7 tech as a true edge rush type guy. I think you're mostly talking about those kind of maybe a head up defensive lineman or shaded just inside as a defensive end off the tackle. But a guy that I think he has the size to be a gap stuffer, but also the explosiveness to be that disruptor up front, get those tackles for loss, get in the backfield, get pressure on the quarterback. What State has been missing more than anything else his ceiling is to be that player. So that's where getting him back is so big for you. And honestly, getting him back, maybe that's a reason why they didn't pursue defensive linemen in the same way I think a lot of people expected them to in the portal. That they were high enough on Whitson returning and his impact that they felt good about that. And that could be a case of trust in their own evaluation. What they've seen is they know that guy can play. So we'll see then. The other guy's coming back. I've talked about him a lot. I am a mark for Dre Bledsoe. I think he's a good player. I really do. Last season, 5.5 tackles for loss, was second on the team, 28 total tackles, which I believe led all defensive linemen, 1.5 sacks, a couple quarterback hurries. I just thought showed flashes. Was he a dominant force along the interior? No. But I thought he showed you enough to be a competent nose tackle within the SEC. And I think he's a guy that, keep in mind, to that point, he had really not done much in his career coming out of Texas. Very limited playing time, not much of a sample set to point to and say that this guy's going to be a high-level player. This is his first time to really get a big role, and I thought showed you some good flashes. So now going in his final year of college football, a guy that if he finally rounds into form, could be a really nice piece for you along the interior of that defensive line. So I like Dre Bledsoe back and what that could mean for State. Calvin Dinkins finally stays healthy last season and was your second most productive defensive lineman. 27 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. Again, a guy that when he has shown the flashes. Can you get it play after play? And I know Dinkins is an older player. He's going into his senior year at this point, and it's kind of like, all right, is he just what he is at this point? But given all the injuries that he's had, given all the changes in D-line coaches that he's had, and it's kind of changing again with the move they made this offseason, is he finally going to be able to put it together because he's finally gotten a second normal offseason under his belt? That's a big thing to watch for. I think Dinkins is a guy that you could see take a step forward. I think Bledsoe and Dinkins, I would not be shocked if one or both of those guys ends up having a really nice season for State. I think they got a chance to take a nice step forward. Trevion Williams at this point kind of is what he is, but a guy that I think is a rotational player. As a rotational defensive lineman in the SEC, I think Trevion Williams is fine. He's never, obviously at this point, never going to be the superstar that we've expected, but I think he is fine at this point as a rotational defensive lineman. TJ Reed showed you a few flashes last year with some disruptive plays, making a couple sacks, 3 quarterback hurries, had a pass broken up, 21 tackles. A guy that not very high expectations for going into last season, and a guy that, kind of was making some plays throughout the offseason, comes into the season opener, gets Southern Miss, and kind of flashed. And you're like, okay, can he continue to develop? And he's a younger player too, so the ceiling to continue to get better is there for him as well. And then, Diesel Moy is just a big body run stuffer to come in for certain packages. As your number 3 guy at nose tackle or number 2 nose, whatever it is, that's perfectly fine there. The returning group, I think, is probably better than they're getting credit for. I think these guys are okay players. Now, okay versus difference maker when you're talking about the SEC is a bigger deal. You need at least one of those guys to be a true stud. I think they're banking on Whitson. They're perhaps banking on any one of those other guys for taking a step forward. But if you get a couple guys to emerge as transfers, everything else there is fine. So I think you've got an okay group to start with there. And then you look at the transfers coming in. And Dalen Evans from Texas A&M, a 6'5", 315, 320-pounder at nose tackle. A guy that A&M fans were surprised to see leave because, had not yet made the impact that they were expecting coming out of high school when he was like a top 100 recruit. But they were losing some bodies up front ahead of him and was going to be have a bigger role this season, was going to compete for a starting job. And, chooses to hit the portal. State had to beat out Tennessee for him. And Tennessee, I think when you look at what they've done defensive linemen over the past few years, Jim Knowles coming in defensive coordinator and what he's done with defensive linemen, the fact that Tennessee really wanted him, I think speaks pretty highly to him coming in as a guy that for a big win for Mississippi State. Bulldog Mississippi asking his Diesel, I believe it's a nickname. I don't remember his actual name, but Diesel is a nickname. I think originally on the roster, I remember him being listed as something else, but Diesel's the nickname there. But Evans was a big win for State. Now, you're kind of, again, going potential over production, which is one of the bigger criticisms we've had of the portal class to this point, is you don't have a lot of guys that have proven production on the field. But that felt like a big win. That felt like a guy that could be that game wrecker in the middle. And if he's just a space eater, in Arnett's defense, having a space eater at the nose is perfectly fine. You kind of had that. Cam Young played that role perfectly for Arnett back in 2021, 2022. All right, can that be what a guy like Dalen Evans comes in, or can he be even more of a disruptor? And when you start talking about a guy being a disruptor, I think Gus Cordova from USC at defensive end is the guy that they're really banking on. And that's, coming out of high school, dude had a million offers as a high 3-star prospect. And those offers were based on the fact that he just reigns terror and, could play both inside and out. Projects more as a defensive lineman, but you can kick him inside if you need to. Just a disruptor. Can get after quarterbacks every single snap. Great pass rusher. Get those tackles for loss. Blow back offensive lineman across from him. High motor player as well. Feels like another one of those guys that could be the spark State needs. If you're talking about somebody stepping in and giving you some big-time pass rush and giving you some big-time reps in that way, it feels like Cordova's got the potential to be that player for State. So, again, we're going potential over production, but there's a lot of excitement in terms of what he could be. And then finally, talk about Jason Jenkins as your other transfer there as defensive end, a guy that 2 seasons ago at Tennessee as a rotational player flashed. He was like the number 3 defensive end for the Vols, but when he got in the game, he made big plays. Made big plays in their win at Oklahoma that season. And made some big plays in some other games for them as well. And it felt like, okay, that's a loaded defensive line room. This guy's performing high when he gets into the game. If he goes and gets a starting role elsewhere, it could blossom. And he hits the portal, goes to Florida State, got paid a bunch of money to go to Florida State. And by the way, I don't know the number. I know Florida State fans have said, Florida State insiders have said they paid him a lot. And he was one of the more expensive transfers they brought in. Didn't work out. Now, he dealt with an offseason injury that perhaps stunted his development and stunted him, getting ready in that system. But was still, named a starter for them to open up the season and just didn't emerge the way they needed him to. It kind of had a pretty disappointing year. Back in the portal now, following Zach Arnett. Obviously, Arnett has seen him. So if you're bringing a guy that came with Arnett, you're trusting that he sees the potential there. I think with Jenkins, what you're banking on, I don't think you're bringing him in to start. I think you're hoping he can kind of get back to what he was 2 years ago, where if we bring this guy in the games, we spell our starter some minutes and some reps, he has a chance to still make a big play, create a negative play, and help the defense out. But asking him to be the guy down in, down out, that's probably not what you're looking to. Is it a transfer class where you got those guys that are the proven studs? No. But you've got a guy that has shown the ability to be a capable rotational player in the SEC, 2 other guys with very high ceilings that if they hit their ceilings would be dominant forces up front for you. And then the guys returning, I think it's a pretty solid group with a couple candidates to take a bigger step forward. I don't really see any true freshmen here early on that would contribute. Maybe that changes as we go through the spring and get more into the offseason. But I think these 9 guys are kind of the group you're looking at leading the way. And I think it's a high ceiling. I think the floor is pretty mediocre, right? If you don't hit on a couple of these transfers, and if Whitson either can't stay healthy or he just isn't, once you get into SEC play, you see him, he's not as dominant as what you had seen previously. Well, then you're probably looking at this group and you're talking about another year with some struggles up front where you're going to get pushed around some. You're not going to be able to create much pressure. But the ceiling is very, very high. And that is more than can have been said previously, that the ceiling is high in this room. You've given yourself some high talent players that if they break out could be really, really good for you. So I have some cautious optimism about this D-line room. I have cautious optimism about the defense as a whole. It's talked about. I think the back 7, man, I think is going to be really good. If you can get a couple defensive linemen that you trust can be disruptors and just eat up blocks and get some pressure. I think with Zach Arnett calling the defense, you're going to have an okay unit. You're going to take a huge step forward on that side of the ball. But they need a couple of those guys to emerge. That'll do it for me this evening. Going over an hour. Love it. Love it. Love having a longer show, which we had plenty to talk about. And I love having the conversation. Glad Bulldog Mississippi's fan. Glad to have you guys in the chat going back and forth. Always really do appreciate it. We'll be back Thursday night, 7 p.m. Central Time with the call-in show. So you guys will have the opportunity to come be a part of the stream. Give me your thoughts. Haven't picked out a topic just yet, what we'll get into. But, of course, we can always just chat about whatever. I'm more than happy to do that as well. Again, appreciate everyone who tuned in. If you haven't already, please leave us a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel and have the notifications turned on so you do know when we do go live. And as always, swing your sword. Hail State.
Hey, y'all. This is Grant Sassery of LSU at the Voice of College Football Network. I'm here today to announce that the Voice of College Football Network now has its official website. It's been uploaded so you can look at all the latest news and content from the Voice of College Football Network. You can also look at different forums, channels, shows, and it has to show all the show schedules right here and the host. Make sure to check out the Voice of College Football's new website at vocfb.com. Once again, vocfb.com.